What if I told you that the most emotionally devastating moment in a Sonic the Hedgehog movie isn't an explosion, isn't a chase sequence, and isn't even a fight? What if I told you it's a single, quiet scene, barely 60 seconds long, where a character with glowing red eyes and a tragic past stares into the void of his own existence and asks a question that most superhero blockbusters are too scared to even whisper? What am I? And why am I here? Yeah, we're doing that today. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that we're about to spend the next hour or so breaking down one of the most surprisingly layered, emotionally rich, and legitimately exciting blockbusters of the entire holiday season of 2024. I'm talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 3, released December 20, 2024, and directed by Jeff Fowler, the third installment in Paramount's live-action hybrid Sonic franchise that, let's be honest, nobody expected to be this good. And I want to be crystal clear right off the top, I came into this movie with moderate expectations. I liked the first Sonic movie well enough, it was fun, surprisingly heartfelt, and Jim Carrey absolutely stole every scene he was in. Sonic 2 expanded the world, brought in Tails and Knuckles, went bigger and louder, but lost a little bit of that intimate charm that made the original special. So going into part 3, I was cautiously optimistic. I figured we'd get another popcorn adventure. Some jokes. Some rings. Maybe a boss fight. Roll credits. What I did not expect was Shadow the Hedgehog. I did not expect a villain, or rather, an antagonist, with this much psychological weight. I did not expect the movie to genuinely interrogate what it means to be alive, to have your memories erased, to be weaponized by the very people who claimed to love you. I did not expect to feel things during a Sonic movie. But here we are. So buckle up. We're going scene by scene, beat by beat, theme by theme. We're talking story, character, performances, symbolism, cinematography, and the full critical breakdown. And somewhere along the way, I'm going to tell you exactly why the ending of this movie hit me harder than I expected, and what it means for the future of this franchise. Let's go. Gotta go fast. Transition sound, the iconic Sonic ring chime. Section 2, movie overview, what is this, and WHO made it. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was released on December 20, 2024. It was directed by Jeff Fowler, who has now helmed all 3 films in the franchise, and written by Pat Casey and Josh Miller, the same duo who wrote the first 2 films. The movie stars Ben Schwartz reprising his role as the voice of Sonic, James Marsden returning as Tom Wachowski, Tika Sumpter back as Maddie, with Colleen O'Shaughnessey once again voicing Tails, Idris Elba continuing his fan-favorite turn as Knuckles, and, the new addition that changed everything, Keanu Reeves stepping in to voice Shadow the Hedgehog. Yes. Keanu Reeves as Shadow. Let that sink in. The film also brings back Jim Carrey in a dual role, returning as Dr. Robotnik and now also playing Gerald Robotnik, the Doctor's grandfather and the original creator of Shadow. It's a decision that sounds gimmicky on paper but pays off in ways that are both dramatically effective and genuinely hilarious. From a cultural context standpoint, this movie arrived at a fascinating moment in the Hollywood landscape. The superhero genre was facing fatigue across the board, Marvel had stumbled through Phase 5, DC was in a full-blown restructuring crisis, and audiences were becoming increasingly vocal about wanting something different. Something with a little more soul. Something that didn't feel like franchise maintenance disguised as storytelling. Sonic 3, somewhat miraculously, threaded that needle. It understood that its audience, a genuinely multi-generational fanbase that includes kids who grew up with the games in the 90s, teenagers who rediscovered the franchise through memes and YouTube, and adults who simply love a good action comedy, needed more than spectacle. They needed heart. And the choice to introduce Shadow as the centerpiece of this film was a bold, calculated risk that paid off enormously. Shadow the Hedgehog is, in the video game lore, one of the most beloved and complicated characters in the entire Sonic universe. Created by Sega, Shadow first appeared in Sonic Adventure 2 in 2001 and became an overnight phenomenon. Dark, brooding, existentially troubled, and phenomenally powerful. He was the anti-Sonic. The shadow to Sonic's light. And he came with a tragic backstory involving a dying girl named Maria, a space station, and betrayal at the hands of the government. The game series later tried to give Shadow his own standalone game in 2005, Sonic's Shadow game, if you will, and while that title was divisive, the character himself remained iconic. Beloved. The subject of endless fan art, fan fiction, memes, and passionate debate. Bringing Shadow to the movies meant walking a tightrope. Go too dark, too edgy, and you alienate the younger audience. Go too soft, too comedic, and you betray the character's essence and enrage the passionate fan base. Somehow, Jeff Fowler and his team found the balance. And Keanu Reeves, in a piece of casting that felt almost divinely inspired, brought something uniquely personal and moving to the role. Audience expectations going in were high but complicated. The trailers had gone viral. The reveal of Keanu as Shadow's voice had broken the internet. And yet there was anxiety. Would this be another case of an iconic video game character being reduced to a plot device? Would Shadow's depth be sacrificed for runtime? Would the movie actually earn its emotional moments, or just gesture at them? Let me tell you exactly what happened. Transition Section 3, Full Story Breakdown, Scene by Scene. Prologue. The Space Colony ARK, 50 years ago. The movie does not open with Sonic. That's the first thing you notice, and it's a smart creative choice that immediately signals this film is playing a different game than its predecessors. Instead, we open in the cold vastness of space. The year is approximately 50 years in the past. We're aboard the space colony ARK, a massive, gleaming research station orbiting Earth. The visual palette here is deliberately retro-futuristic, all clean whites and clinical blues, the aesthetic of Cold War-era science fiction, of optimism twisted into something ominous. The cinematography frames this space station not as a wonder but as a cage. We meet Gerald Robotnik, the grandfather of the Eggman we know, and here Jim Carrey delivers one of the film's most quietly powerful performances. Gerald is not the cartoonish villain his grandson will become. He's a true believer, a scientist who genuinely thinks he's doing the right thing. He is working on Project Shadow, his life's work, his magnum opus, his attempt to create the ultimate life form. And the motivation behind this project is achingly human. His granddaughter, Maria, is dying of a degenerative disease called NIDS, neuroimmunodeficiency syndrome, and Gerald believes that the research he's conducting, the life form he's engineering, holds the key to a cure. Maria herself, young, pale, bright-eyed, with a warmth that fills every frame she's in, becomes the emotional anchor of this prologue. She and the newly created Shadow form a bond that is tender and immediate. Shadow, at this point in the story, is not the dark warrior we'll come to know. He's curious, gentle, tentative. He reaches out a hand toward Maria and she takes it without hesitation, and in that moment, the film quietly establishes everything it needs to. Shadow is not inherently violent. He is not inherently broken. He was loved, once. And that love was stolen from him. Then the government raids the ARK. The sequence is shot with the controlled chaos of a thriller, soldiers pouring through corridors, alarms screaming, Gerald trying desperately to protect his work and his granddaughter. Maria grabs Shadow and runs. She gets him to an escape pod. She puts him in. She looks at him one last time, and we see it in her eyes, the understanding that she is not going to make it. She tells him to find happiness on Earth. She tells him to live. And then the pod launches, and the soldiers take her, and the hatch closes, and Shadow watches through the porthole as the ARK becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Cut to black. This is maybe 4-5 minutes of screen time. And it does more emotional heavy lifting than some movies manage in 2 hours. Because now, when Shadow appears as an antagonist, when he rages and destroys and refuses to hear reason, we understand. We feel the weight of what was taken from him. The movie has given us the wound before it's shown us the scar. Act 1, Sonic's World, 1 year later. We cut to the present day, and now we get our Sonic, all blubber and wisecracks and unbridled kinetic energy. Ben Schwartz is, once again, a delight in this role. His Sonic has evolved across 3 films from a wide-eyed outsider learning what home means into something more settled, more confident, more occasionally arrogant in the way that only someone who has saved the world twice can be. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles have become, officially, publicly, Earth's heroic defenders. They have a fan base. There are fan clubs. There are action figures. A little girl hands Sonic a hand-drawn portrait of him, and the look on his face, even through animation, is pure. This is what he's always wanted. To belong. To matter. To be loved. But the movie is smart enough to immediately complicate this. Because belonging also means accountability. It means press conferences and protocols and government oversight, and Tom and Maddie gently suggesting that maybe they should think before leaping into action. Sonic chafes against this. Not because he's irresponsible, he genuinely wants to do good, but because he's always operated on instinct, on speed, on that gut-level certainty that he knows what needs to be done. The trio's dynamic has settled into a genuinely fun rhythm at this point. Tails, still voiced with incredible warmth and nervous intelligence by Colleen O'Shaughnessey, is the brain of the operation, perpetually calculating odds and scenarios and frequently being ignored by Sonic, who loves her dearly but rarely waits for the math. Knuckles, Idris Elba's deep, gravelly commitment to this character remains one of the franchise's greatest gifts, is the muscle and the warrior, still adjusting to life on Earth with his beautifully literal interpretation of human customs and his absolute inability to detect sarcasm. There's a scene early in the film where Knuckles is at a bowling alley with Tom and Wade, trying, with great seriousness, to understand the cultural significance of the sport, and it is laugh-out-loud hilarious while also being genuinely sweet. Knuckles is not a joke. He's a warrior from an ancient civilization trying to find meaning in a new world. The comedy comes from his sincerity, not from mockery, and that distinction matters enormously. The arrival of Shadow. The inciting incident hits hard and fast. A government black site, deep, underground, sealed with layers of classified protocol, is breached. Something got out. Something ancient. Something that was never supposed to be found. Shadow the Hedgehog has been released. His first appearance in the present-day timeline is nothing short of iconic. The film doesn't oversell it with a giant musical sting or a slow-motion reveal. Instead, Shadow simply steps out of shadow, literally, into a corridor filled with unconscious soldiers, and the camera holds on him for a long, quiet beat. He's smaller than you expect. Sleeker. His eyes are the red of dying embers. And there's something about his posture, coiled, controlled, radiating a stillness that reads as far more dangerous than any amount of snarling, that communicates instantly, this is not someone to be reasoned with. Not yet. Keanu Reeves' vocal performance here is extraordinary in its restraint. He speaks slowly, deliberately. Each word feels chosen with the care of someone who understands that language is a precision instrument. When Shadow says, quietly, "I have waited long enough," the line lands not as a comic book villain's declaration but as the statement of a genuinely traumatized being who has been locked in a box for 50 years and has finally run out of patience. Shadow believes, and this is the central misunderstanding that drives the entire film, that the governments of the world ordered the attack on the ARK, that they killed Maria. That Gerald was imprisoned and died alone because of the very civilization that Shadow is now supposed to protect. And so his mission, as he understands it, is justice. Retribution. He is not a monster. He is a grieving soul with power beyond imagining, pointed in the wrong direction by 50 years of isolation and pain and the last command he was given before entering stasis. That command? The one embedded in his programming, the last thing Gerald encoded before the government took him? Destroy the world that destroyed the ARK. This is the engine of the film. And it's a beautifully constructed one. The first confrontation. Sonic and Shadow's first meeting is one of the film's great set pieces. It takes place in and around a major American city, partly on highways, partly through buildings, partly in the air, and it is kinetically phenomenal. Jeff Fowler has always had a strong sense of how to shoot Sonic's speed, how to make the audience feel the velocity rather than just observe it, and here he adds the complication of a second speedster whose abilities equal and in some ways exceed Sonic's own. Because Shadow can do everything Sonic can do and more. Where Sonic's abilities are joyful, even in combat there's an ebullience to how he moves, a physical expression of his personality. Shadow's abilities are precise, economical, almost surgical. He uses chaos control. He teleports. He manipulates space and time in small but devastating ways. And his speed isn't exuberant, it's predatory. Sonic tries to talk to him. This is, honestly, one of the smartest choices in the screenplay. Sonic's instinct is never to fight first. He wants to understand. He cracks jokes, tries to diffuse the tension, appeals to reason. Shadow is not interested. Shadow has been carrying this rage for 50 years, and a fast-talking blue hedgehog who has never known real loss is not going to talk him down with wise cracks. The fight ends inconclusively, with Shadow pulling back after delivering a message that is more threat than warning. Sonic is shaken. Not physically, he heals fast, but existentially. He's never encountered someone like this. Someone with his power and none of his hope. The twist, Shadow's true programming. This is where the film makes its boldest structural choice. Roughly halfway through the second act, we learn the full truth about Shadow's creation. Not just the tragedy of Maria and the ARK, but the specific details of what Gerald did in the aftermath of losing his granddaughter, after the government imprisoned him and forced him to continue his research under duress. Gerald loved Maria. He would have done anything to save her. But after she died, after they took her, something in Gerald broke. His grief curdled into something darker. And in the final days before his own death, he encoded a failsafe into Shadow's programming, a directive that would activate once Shadow was released, one final act of vengeance from beyond the grave. The directive was this: if the world that destroyed the ARK still stands, destroy it. And Shadow, who has no memory of being reprogrammed, whose mind was wiped clean before he was put into stasis, removing all the warmth and gentleness and the real memories of Maria that defined him, has been moving toward this endpoint without knowing it. He believes he's acting on his own grief, his own judgment, his own sense of justice. He doesn't know he's been turned into a weapon. This revelation recontextualizes everything. Shadow is not a villain. He is a victim. He has been victimized twice, once by the government that killed Maria, and again by Gerald himself, who loved him but ultimately could not resist the poison of grief turned revenge. The moment Sonic understands this, everything changes. Because now the question isn't how do we stop Shadow, it's how do we save him. Act 2, The Pursuit and the Plan. The middle section of the film keeps all its plates spinning with impressive confidence. On the action side, Shadow is moving toward a target, a facility that houses a global electromagnetic system capable of catastrophic damage, and Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are trying to intercept him. These chase sequences are exhilarating, each one building on the last, each one finding new spatial configurations and choreographic ideas to keep the action fresh. On the emotional side, the film is doing something more interesting. It's drawing a parallel between Shadow's situation and Sonic's own journey of belonging. Sonic has spent 3 movies finding his place in the world, finding his people, his home, his purpose. The found family theme is baked into the franchise's DNA. And now the film is asking, what happens when someone has had all of that stripped away? What happens when the love that defined you becomes the weapon used against you? Tom and Maddie, James Marsden and Tika Sumpter, warmer and more lived in than ever, serve as the moral compass here in a way that feels earned rather than obligatory. Tom in particular has a conversation with Sonic that is one of the film's quietest and most effective scenes. They're sitting on the hood of Tom's truck at dusk, and Tom says something like, and I'm paraphrasing, you know what it feels like to not know where you come from. You know what it feels like to have people take that from you. Maybe that's why you have to be the one to reach him. It's a simple line. It lands like a hammer. Jim Carrey's dual role. We need to spend some time here because Jim Carrey, who apparently came out of retirement specifically for this role, is doing career-level work in this movie. Not just as Eggman, who remains a perfect blend of physical comedy, genuine menace, and wounded ego, but especially as Gerald Robotnik. The filmmakers achieve the dual role through a combination of de-aging technology and Carrey's own physicality. Gerald is straighter-backed, more precise in his movements, with a weight to him that Eggman, for all his brilliance, lacks. And Carrey commits fully to both. His Gerald is heartbreaking. There are flashback sequences, triggered by documents Tales uncovers, where we see Gerald in the aftermath of Maria's death, and Carrey plays grief with a restraint that is, honestly, surprising given his comedic register. The eyes. It's all in the eyes. The hollow, far-away look of someone who has experienced a loss so total that the self has been hollowed out by it. The scene where Gerald records a final message, the one Shadow will eventually find, the one that explains everything, is 5 minutes of unbroken performance that I would argue is some of the best acting Jim Carrey has ever put on screen. He is fully present. Fully human. And when he says, quietly, that he is sorry, that he knows what he has done to Shadow is a betrayal, but that he cannot stop himself, cannot separate his love from his rage, it is genuinely devastating. Meanwhile, the present-day Eggman is being used brilliantly as a dark mirror. Because Eggman has his own complicated relationship with Gerald's legacy. He grew up in the shadow of a grandfather who disappeared, a legacy of genius and infamy that shaped his own psychology. And the reveal, when it comes, that Eggman has been quietly working toward his own version of Gerald's plan, not out of grief, but out of ambition, adds a layer to his character that the franchise has been building toward for 3 films. The third act, the confrontation on the Ark. The film's climax moves the action to space, to the space colony Ark itself, now derelict, orbiting Earth like a metal skeleton of the tragedy that started everything. This is a bold choice. It's expensive, visually, and it demands that the emotional stakes be high enough to justify the spectacle. They are. The sequence begins with Sonic and his team making it to the Ark ahead of Shadow, barely. They know what Shadow is looking for, the final component that will activate Gerald's failsafe. And they know that if Shadow finds it and activates it in his current state, still believing he is acting on his own free will, still carrying the false memories and the encoded rage, the results will be catastrophic. But there's a complication. Because the Ark is not empty. I won't go into maximum detail here to preserve a few surprises for those who haven't seen it, but I will say this, what Sonic finds in the deeper corridors of the Ark fundamentally reshapes the film's emotional architecture in its final 30 minutes. There are records. There are recordings. There is evidence, preserved, waiting, of who Shadow truly was before the reprogramming. Of the friendship he had with Maria. Of the warmth that existed before the weapon was made. And Sonic, who has been racing this entire film on instinct and adrenaline, stops. Sits down. Watches. And understands. When Shadow arrives, the confrontation that follows is not primarily physical. There's action, yes, extraordinary, visually spectacular action that makes full use of the zero-gravity environment of the Ark and the full extent of both characters' abilities. But the core of the scene is Sonic trying to show Shadow the truth. Trying to get through the layers of reprogrammed rage and grief and isolation to the being underneath. The one who held Maria's hand. The one who promised to find happiness on Earth. The moment Shadow sees the recordings, the moment the true memories begin to surface through the programming, is one of the most affecting things in the movie. Keanu Reeves' voice breaks. Just slightly. Just enough. The composure cracks, and underneath it is something raw and young and terrified. A being who was loved, lost, turned into a weapon, and is only now, after 50 years, being allowed to grieve properly. Shadow does not destroy the world. But it costs him something. To choose against the programming, to choose against the directive, is an act of will that the film frames explicitly as an act of self-creation. Shadow is not choosing to follow orders. He is choosing who he wants to be. And in doing so, he becomes the person Maria always believed he could be. The ending. The resolution of the film is careful not to be too neat. Shadow doesn't suddenly become Sonic's best friend. He doesn't join the team with a smile and a thumbs up. He is damaged. He is still processing. There is a year's worth of programming to dismantle, 50 years of isolation to reckon with, and a grief that has been weaponized and will now have to be experienced naturally, painfully, honestly. But he chooses to stay. He chooses Earth. He chooses the promise he made to Maria. And in the film's final exchange, just Sonic and Shadow, standing on the hull of the Ark with Earth glowing blue below them, Sonic extends his hand. Shadow looks at it for a long moment. Then he takes it. No words. Just two hands clasping. The echo of Maria taking Shadow's hand 50 years ago. The circle closed. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. Cut to credits. Post-credits note, there is a mid-credits scene that strongly implies the setup for a fourth film, involving a character introduction that will send the fanbase absolutely wild. I won't say who. But if you're familiar with the Sonic game universe, you'll know exactly what it means when you see it. And you will lose your mind. Transition, Section 4, Character and Performance Analysis. Shadow the Hedgehog. Let's start with the obvious centerpiece, because the entire film rises or falls on Shadow, and Keanu Reeves' performance deserves significant examination. Reeves is not, traditionally, known as a voice actor. His live-action work operates in a very specific register, controlled, minimalist, operating in the pauses between words as much as in the words themselves. What's remarkable is how perfectly that register translates to Shadow. Because Shadow is a character defined by control. By containment. By the deliberate suppression of enormously powerful feelings behind a wall of precision and economy. Reeves plays him with a weight that you don't always get in animated or voice performance. There's no showboating. No vocal gymnastics. Just presence. When Shadow speaks, there is the sense of someone who has had 50 years to think about every word they would say when the time came. The unhurried quality of Reeves' delivery communicates trauma with more efficiency than a dozen expository scenes could. The moment of breaking, the moment in the Ark when the true memories surface, is the performance's apex, and Reeves handles it beautifully. The break is small. Controlled. But it's there. The crack in the composure. The recognition that underneath all the rage and programming is a being who simply misses someone who was kind to him. Psychologically, Shadow is one of the most richly drawn characters in the franchise because the film understands that trauma doesn't make you a villain. Trauma misdirects. It gives you the right emotions, grief, rage, the desire for justice, and points them in the wrong directions. Shadow is not wrong to feel what he feels. He is wrong about what he should do with those feelings. And the film's emotional work is the process of redirecting rather than extinguishing. Sonic. Ben Schwartz is now in his third film as Sonic, and the comfort he has with the character is palpable. But what's interesting about Sonic in this film is that the character is required to do something harder than he's done before, be the emotional anchor for someone else's breakdown. Sonic has always been the heart of these movies, but he's been the heart in a self-focused way. His journey is about his belonging, his family, his place. Here, for the first time, the film asks him to genuinely decenter himself. To recognize that the most important thing he can do is not save the world physically, but reach someone emotionally. And Schwartz plays this beautifully. There are moments where you can hear Sonic thinking, where the usual barrage of quips slows down and something quieter takes over. A genuineness. And empathy. The film doesn't abandon Sonic's humor, it's still a Sonic movie, and the comedy lands throughout, but it contextualizes that humor as coping mechanism, as connection strategy, as the way Sonic builds bridges with people. And when that strategy isn't working, when the jokes aren't landing and the situation demands something else, the film is brave enough to let Sonic just be present. Just be human. Or whatever the hedgehog equivalent of human is. Tails and Knuckles. Both supporting heroes are given more to do here than in the second film, and both benefit enormously from it. Tails' arc in this film quietly mirrors Shadow's in a thematically elegant way. She is also someone who has been defined by a sense of otherness, too. Tails, ostracized, finding belonging in Sonic's orbit. The film uses this parallel to give Tails a perspective on Shadow that nobody else in the group has. She understands, on a cellular level, what it means to be different in a way that makes people afraid of you. Her advocacy for giving Shadow a chance to be heard isn't just compassion, it's identification. Knuckles, meanwhile, gets the film's funniest subplot and also its most unexpected emotional depth. The bowling alley storyline, which sounds, on paper, like comic relief filler, actually pays off thematically in the third act when Knuckles applies the lessons he's learned about teamwork and trust and reading people to a key moment in the climax. It's clever filmmaking. Plant the comedy seed early, let it grow, harvest it for genuine dramatic effect. Tom and Maddie. James Marsden and Tika Sumpter are doing quiet, essential work that often gets overshadowed by the CGI spectacle around them, and they deserve recognition. Tom in particular has become one of the more interesting elements of this franchise, a completely ordinary human man who has decided, without hesitation, that his family includes 3 highly powered alien hedgehogs, and who navigates that reality with a kind of steady, unpretentious warmth that is deeply appealing. The scene I mentioned earlier, Tom on the truck hood with Sonic at dusk, is Marsden's best moment in the series. He plays it with no irony, no self-awareness, just a father figure trying to help his kid understand something that the kid is almost ready to understand on his own. Jim Carrey as Gerald/Eggman. I've touched on this already, but Carrey's performance here is genuinely significant. The dual role could have been a gimmick, a winking, nudging meta-joke for the audience. Instead, Carrey uses the structural rhyme between Gerald and Eggman to illuminate both characters. Gerald is what Eggman could have been with love and loss redirected towards something meaningful. Eggman is what happens when that same intelligence and ambition is never checked by real emotional connection. They are the same man, separated by circumstance and choice. And Carrey, through physicality, vocal register, and sheer force of committed performance, makes you feel both the connection and the distance simultaneously. It is sophisticated work dressed up in the costume of a cartoon villain movie. Transition Section 5, Themes, Symbolism and Subtext. Theme 1, Identity and Free Will. The film's central philosophical question is one that resonates far beyond its video game origins. Can you choose who you are when other people have already chosen for you? Shadow has been programmed, literally, in his case, but the metaphor is deliberately broadened. We are all, to varying degrees, the products of our upbringing, our trauma, our inherited beliefs and coded directives. The things we believe we're choosing freely may be choices we were conditioned to make before we were old enough to question them. Shadow's journey is the journey of becoming conscious of one's own programming, and choosing, with full awareness of the cost, to override it. This is not easy. The film doesn't pretend it is. The moment of choice in the ARK is agonizing precisely because the programming doesn't just turn off. Shadow has to fight himself to make a different choice. And the film frames this as heroic, not the fighting of monsters or the saving of worlds, but the willingness to say, what I was made to be is not who I choose to be. This lands particularly powerfully in the context of a franchise that has always been about chosen family and self-determination. Sonic chose Earth. Shadow chooses humanity. Both are acts of will against origin. Theme 2, Grief as a Weapon. This is the theme that gives the film its unusual emotional register, and it is executed with more sophistication than you'd normally expect from a family blockbuster. Gerald Robotnik loved his granddaughter. That love was real. The grief he felt when she died was real. But the film is unflinching about the ways in which legitimate, real grief can curdle into something destructive when it is denied outlet, denied justice, denied the basic human dignity of being witnessed and acknowledged. Gerald couldn't grieve properly. He was imprisoned. He was isolated. He was forced to continue working for the people who caused his loss. And so his grief became weaponized, encoded into the being he loved, turned into a directive for destruction. The love remained, buried underneath. But the weapon was what got built. This is a story that plays differently for adult viewers than for children, and intentionally so. Children see an adventure. Adults see the portrait of a man destroyed by uncomplicated tragedy and the inability to heal. Adults recognize Gerald, they have felt that grief, or watched someone they love be consumed by it. The film treats that recognition with respect. Theme 3, The Found Family as Antidote. The Sonic franchise has always been about found family, but the third film sharpens this into something more specific. Found family as the specific antidote to the kind of isolation that weaponizes grief. Maria was Shadow's first family, imperfect, stolen, but real. What the film argues, through Sonic's relationship with Tom and Maddie and Tails and Knuckles, is that the loss of that first family is not the end of the possibility of family. That love is not a finite resource. That the capacity for connection, for genuine, chosen, freely given belonging, can be rebuilt, even after catastrophic loss. Shadow doesn't get that at the end of the film. Not yet. But he gets the beginning of it. The extended hand. The first step. And the film treats that beginning with the gravity it deserves, not as a triumphant resolution but as a fragile, hopeful start. Symbolism, the ring. Throughout the Sonic franchise, the golden ring has served as a power-up, a portal, a resource. In this film, it takes on additional symbolic weight. The ring, the circle without beginning or end, becomes associated specifically with Shadow and the concept of return. Shadow's path is circular, from the ARK to Earth to imprisonment, back to the ARK and finally to Earth again. The rings that appear in key emotional moments, particularly in the ARK climax, frame the film's ending as completion rather than conclusion. The circle closes. The return is made. The promise is kept. Symbolism, light and dark. The visual contrast between Sonic's blue and Shadow's black is deployed throughout the film with elegant consistency. Sonic's environments are warm, saturated, golden, sunsets, suburban kitchens, the glow of ring portals. Shadow's environments are cold, desaturated, blue-white, corridors, space, the clinical geometry of the ARK. But the film complicates this binary. In the ARK climax, the lighting design deliberately bleeds the two palettes together, Shadow standing in warm light, Sonic casting shadow. The visual language tells us what the story is doing. These are not opposites. They are complements. The dark and the light require each other. Foreshadowing the bowling scene. Go back and watch the bowling alley scene with this knowledge. Knuckles is not learning about bowling. He's learning about trust. About the moment you release the ball, the moment you commit to a throw and can no longer control where it goes. About faith in the physics of the thing, in the principle that if you do the right thing at the right moment, the outcome will follow. When Knuckles applies this logic in the ARK, when he makes a leap of faith at exactly the right moment, it's not a non sequitur. It's the payoff of a seed planted 40 minutes earlier. That's good filmmaking. Transition Section 6, Technical and Artistic Review. Direction, Jeff Fowler's command. Jeff Fowler has now directed 3 of these films, and with each one his command of the franchise's unique visual language has grown more confident. What he does particularly well in the 3rd film is balancing the film's genuinely dark emotional core with the franchise's commitment to fun, balancing the spectacular action with the intimate character moments, balancing the new character of Shadow with the established ensemble. The ARK sequence is his directorial apex, a 30-minute climax that manages to be visually spectacular, emotionally resonant, and narratively coherent simultaneously. That is harder than it sounds. Many blockbusters manage 1 or 2 of those. Getting all 3 is the job, and Fowler does it here with real confidence. His use of space, literal and figurative, throughout the film is also worth noting. He consistently gives the emotional moments room to breathe. He doesn't underscore every beat with music. He allows silences. He trusts his actors, and his voice cast, to carry scenes without the safety net of constant stimulation. This patience is a directorial maturity that wasn't quite as present in the first 2 films. Cinematography. Brendan Galvin. Brendan Galvin returns as director of photography, and the film looks genuinely excellent. The color science is precise, the warm/cold contrast is maintained rigorously throughout without ever feeling schematic or heavy-handed. The practical environments, the ARK set pieces in particular, are beautifully dressed and lit, grounding the CGI elements in physical space. The action sequences benefit from a clarity of spatial geography that is increasingly rare in modern blockbusters. At every point in every chase and fight sequence, you know exactly where everyone is, what the stakes are, and what needs to happen. There is no chaos for chaos's sake. The camera serves the action rather than replacing it. The most cinematographically striking individual shot in the film is the one from the prologue, Maria at the porthole, her face lit by the departing escape pod, surrounded by the darkness of space. It's a simple composition that does enormous work. It frames Maria as both a source of light and a figure already surrounded by darkness, already in the moment of loss. The shot is held just long enough to make you feel it, then cut before sentimentality can take hold. Visual effects. The integration of CGI characters with practical sets and environments continues to improve with each film. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Shadow are rendered with a consistency of texture and lighting that makes them feel genuinely present in their environments. The fur physics alone are remarkable. Each character has a distinctive fur texture and movement pattern that contributes to their visual identity. Shadow deserves particular mention. The design team made the smart decision to give him subtle physical tells that communicate his emotional state. His fur, when he is suppressing extreme emotion, has a faint electrical crackle, barely visible, like static electricity. When the programming begins to break down in the ARK sequence, this crackle intensifies and then disappears entirely, replaced by something smoother, softer. The visual cue reinforces the emotional beat without underlining it. Elegant music and sound design. The score, composed by Tom Holkenborg, Junkie XL, is the franchise's best yet. Holkenborg uses the Sonic franchise's classic game themes as building blocks rather than nostalgia triggers, weaving them into a fully orchestrated original score that deepens in complexity as the film does. Shadow's theme is particularly distinctive, a cello-led motif in a minor key that has the deliberate, unhurried quality of his characterization. It's patient music for a patient predator. And in the ARK sequence, when Shadow's theme and Sonic's theme begin to interweave and finally resolve in the same key, the musical grammar tells the emotional story with perfect clarity. The sound design is likewise excellent. The specific sonic signature of Shadow's chaos control, a deep, resonant bass pulse that precedes each teleportation, becomes associated with dread in the first two acts and with awe in the third. Same sound, different emotional register. That's sophisticated sound design. The licensed music choices are well curated, a mix of needle drops that span generations, consistent with the franchise's tradition of using music to bridge its multi-generational audience. I won't list every song, but there is one specific track during the film's emotional climax, a choice that I suspect will polarize some viewers but which I found completely devastatingly perfect, that I'll leave for you to discover. Editing. The film runs at approximately 109 minutes, and it earns every one of them. The editing, by Gareth C. Scales, is crisp without being frantic. The action sequences are cut on motion, using the character's own velocity as the rhythm of the edit, rather than on reaction, which creates a pacing that feels organic rather than mechanically constructed. The structural choice to open with the ARK prologue and return to it in fragments throughout the second act, using it as an emotional drumbeat that grows louder as the climax approaches, is an editing decision as much as a writing one, and it's effective. The film never lets you forget where Shadow came from and what was taken from him. The prologue is always present, always informing your reading of the present-day action. Transition Section 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. What the film does brilliantly. Let's talk about what this movie genuinely gets right, because I want to give full credit where it's earned. First and most importantly, it respects its audience. All of them. The children who are seeing Shadow for the first time, the adult fans who have carried this character in their hearts for 20 years, and the casual moviegoers who just want a fun time at the movies. The film operates on multiple registers simultaneously and never condescends to any layer of its audience. Second, it gives its villain depth without sacrificing his threat. Shadow is genuinely dangerous. The action sequences make that clear repeatedly. But he's also genuinely suffering, and the film holds both truths simultaneously without letting either diminish the other. This is remarkably difficult to do, and most superhero films don't even attempt it. Third, the balance between comedy and drama is pitch perfect. There is a real risk, in a film with this much emotional weight, of the humor feeling tonal whiplash, a way of deflating tension rather than managing it. Sonic 3 avoids this by making the comedy character-driven rather than situation-driven. The jokes land because they come from who these people are, not because a character stumbles or makes a face at the wrong moment. When Knuckles is funny, he's funny because of his genuine, specific, Knuckles-ness. Same with Tom. Same with Sonic himself. Fourth, the Keanu casting. I'll say it simply, there is no version of this film that works as well with a different voice. Keanu Reeves brings something irreplaceable to Shadow, a combination of genuine weight and a certain cultural resonance, hello, John Wick, that makes the audience believe in Shadow's capability from the first moment they hear his voice. The casting is a masterstroke. What the film struggles with. Honesty demands I flag the places where the film falls short, even if they're relatively minor in the context of a largely excellent movie. The second act has a structural sag around the 40 to 60 minute mark. There's a subplot involving a government agency, think Men in Black Light, that serves the plot mechanically but feels tonally slightly off, a bit too conventional, a bit too generic thriller for a movie that is otherwise operating in its own specific register. The scenes aren't bad, but they slow the emotional momentum at a critical point. Some of the humor aimed squarely at children, and I want to be fair here, because this is genuinely a family film and children deserve jokes too, doesn't entirely land for adult viewers. There are a handful of physical gags in the first act that feel slightly labored, slightly overextended. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that breaks the film. But moments where you can feel the movie reaching for a laugh it hasn't quite earned. Additionally, Tails, for all the good work done with her character, is still somewhat underserved relative to her potential. She is clearly the most intellectually capable member of the team, and there are scenes where her expertise is called upon and then immediately bypassed in favor of Sonic's instinct. Given the film's thematic interest in questioning one's own programming, there's an opportunity to let Tails' analytical mind be wrong in an interesting way, to let her data fail her where Sonic's emotional intelligence succeeds, that the film doesn't fully pursue. Comparisons. The natural point of comparison is the rest of the live-action video game adaptation genre. We've had a lot of these in recent years: Uncharted, Detective Pikachu, the Super Mario Bros. Movie, and the quality curve has been wildly inconsistent. The Super Mario Bros. Movie is the most direct comparison, a beloved Nintendo franchise adapted into a family blockbuster with massive box office expectations. Where Mario succeeded through sheer visual exuberance and fan service, it largely avoided emotional complexity. Sonic 3 goes further. It takes on more. And in doing so, it creates something with longer legs. A film that rewards return viewings and grows with its audience rather than serving them a single, perfect serving of nostalgia and color. Detective Pikachu is perhaps the closer philosophical comparison, a family film that takes its source material's emotional undercurrent seriously and builds a story around themes of loss, identity, and the limits of memory. Sonic 3 is, in some ways, the more ambitious film, larger in scope, more complex in character, while Detective Pikachu has a kind of intimate tenderness that the Sonic franchise, with its inherently kinetic DNA, can't quite match. In the broader superhero landscape, the film most thematically similar to Sonic 3 is, somewhat surprisingly, Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, another animated adjacent feature that uses its genre's conventions to explore genuine questions about identity, inheritance, and the relationship between who we were made to be and who we choose to be. That's rarefied company. Sonic 3 doesn't quite reach those heights, but the fact that the comparison is not absurd is itself a form of high praise. The franchise trajectory. Looking at the three films together, the trajectory of this franchise is genuinely impressive. The first Sonic movie was a proof of concept. It established that you could make a live-action Sonic film that wasn't an embarrassment, found a leading human character worth caring about, and, crucially, earned Jim Carrey the right to be as unhinged as he wanted to be. Sonic 2 was the franchise's growing pains entry, bigger, louder, introducing new characters with varying success, expanding the world at the occasional expense of the intimate character dynamics that made the first film special. Not a bad film. But a transitional one. Sonic 3 is the franchise arriving. The storytelling is more confident, the character work is deeper, the themes are more ambitious, and the emotional register has expanded to include something genuinely affecting. This is a franchise that has earned its audience's trust and is now beginning to spend that trust on something worthy. Transition, Section 8, Final Verdict, the score, the meaning, and WHO. This is for what does this movie mean? Let me bring it back to where we started. That moment. The quiet one. Shadow in a corridor, red eyes in the dark, asking what he is and why he's here. This is, fundamentally, the question at the center of all existential inquiry: what am I, and why do I exist? And Sonic the Hedgehog 3, a Paramount Pictures tentpole based on a Sega video game about a cartoon hedgehog, treats that question with more seriousness and more honesty than dozens of films with far greater pretensions to significance. Because the answer the film arrives at is not a simple one. Shadow is not given a tidy ontological resolution. He doesn't discover that he was always good, that the darkness was never real, that love conquers all in a bright flash of narrative convenience. Instead, he is given something harder and more useful: agency. The ability to choose. The understanding that he is not the sum of his programming, not the weapon Gerald made him, not the grief that haunted the ARK. He is something that exists beyond all of that, something that can reach its own conclusions about its own nature. That's a profound message. And it's wrapped in a package that will reach millions of children who will absorb it without necessarily having the vocabulary to articulate what they've learnt. They'll just know that Shadow was cool and sad and real, and that he chose something better than what he was made for. That knowledge will sit somewhere in them. This is what the best family cinema does. It doesn't talk down to its youngest audience members. It trusts them with the real thing, presented in a language they can access. Who is this movie for? Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is for kids who want an adventure. It is for teenagers who grew up with Shadow in Sonic Adventure 2 and wanted to see him done justice on screen, and who will, I think, feel that justice was genuinely served. It is for adults who can watch a film about grief and identity and the weaponization of love and not require those themes to come dressed in prestige packaging to take them seriously. It is for parents who have sat through enough mediocre family blockbusters to have given up expecting anything more than adequate, who will be genuinely surprised by how much they feel watching this. It is for anyone who has ever been made into something by someone else's pain, and had to fight to become something of their own choosing. That's a lot of people. That's most people, if we're being honest. Strengths, summary. Keanu Reeves' voice performance as Shadow, restrained, weighted, and ultimately devastating, is one of the best pieces of voice acting in a blockbuster in years. Jim Carrey's dual role earns every dramatic moment it reaches for. The action sequences are kinetically spectacular while remaining spatially coherent. The thematic architecture is ambitious and executed with genuine craft. The emotional core, Shadow's journey from weapon to person, is handled with more sophistication and less sentimentality than the subject matter demands. Weaknesses, summary. A slightly sagging second act. The government subplot has generic thriller texture. Occasional comedy aimed younger than its best humor. Tale's full potential slightly unrealized. Final rating. Taking everything into account, the performances, the direction, the themes, the execution, the emotional impact, the willingness to take genuine risks in what could have been a purely commercial product, I'm giving Sonic the Hedgehog 3 an 8.5 out of 10. This is not a perfect film. But it is a genuinely excellent one. It is the best film in its franchise by a significant margin, one of the most emotionally intelligent family blockbusters in recent memory, and a film that I expect will be remembered as a high point of the video game adaptation genre for years to come. More than that, and I don't say this lightly, it is a film that earns the right to make you feel something. Not by manipulating you. Not by pushing cheap emotional buttons. But by building, brick by careful brick, A story about a being who was made into a weapon and chose to become a person instead. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. Final words. Shadow the Hedgehog looked at a world that had used him, weaponized his love, erased his memories, and tried to make his grief into a tool of destruction. And he chose something else. Not because it was easy. Not because he was told to. But because somewhere underneath 50 years of pain, there was still a memory of a girl who told him to find happiness on Earth. He kept his promise. Not a bad message for a movie about cartoon hedgehogs going fast. Gotta go fast indeed. Outro music, orchestral swell with Sonic's iconic theme woven in. If this breakdown hit you the way Sonic 3 hit me, drop a like and subscribe. It keeps this channel alive and tells me you want more of this kind of deep dive content. If there's a movie you want me to cover next, leave it in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop asking the questions that matter. This has been your movie breakdown. Peace.